Hey everybody, wake up. This is Wake Up with Mark Joyner, episode number 60. And today we will ask the question, are cultural observations racist? All right, this is actually a pretty important question. Might seem like a strange question to ask. Knowing the business I'm in, I teach people how to simplify their lives and be more productive, how to be happier, healthier, how to navigate what I call the complexity gap. It's this gap between how much information you can process and how much information is being dumped into the world at a given time. But this question is actually quite apropos through that lens. And in fact, if you don't navigate this correctly, you are not going to be very effective as a person. Now, by the way, I'm testing something new today. I've got a chat window open where I can see you guys. I'm hoping this time I can see your chats live. I hope I have the tech worked out correctly this time. So if you can see me, and if you are listening right now live, please say something in there. I want to see if it pops up, just as a little side note here. So why do I think that this question is so extremely important? Well, we're in an age right now where there is a trend where a lot of folks are being very sensitive about these things. We're wanting to treat people, from different races, different sexual preferences, and whatnot, a little bit better than they've been treated in the past, in American culture, at least. And I think this on the surface is a great notion. Of course, it's okay. All right, the chat app is working. John, thank you for that. Danny. Okay, awesome. Good. All right, getting this stuff working. So I think it's on the surface, it's a very good notion for us wanting to treat each other better, to treat each other with a bit more sensitivity and whatnot. But this has gone a little too far for a number of reasons, and I'll explain why. So first off, if you are someone who is offended by something that someone says, one approach to this is we can go out into the world and try to remove all offense, right? And if we do that, we're never going to win that battle, because suffering is never going to be completely removed from the world. That which offends you is never going to be completely removed from the world. It is an asymptotic, a never-ending, bottomless pit of a process. Okay, it's just simply not possible. And when we go out and we attempt to change the world because we are offended by the world, sometimes we can do good things, right? Gandhi was not very happy with the way things were in India, with the way the Brits were treating the Indians. And he stood up and through fighting a very intelligently fought asymmetric war against the Brits, using non-violent means, he was able to cause change. It was a profound thing. Okay, so we speak about these things, we have to be very careful to make sure that we're not creating false dichotomies, right? While Gandhi created some great good, if you go through life like that and you're constantly offended by things and then you say, well, I'm going to change the world rather than change the way I'm receiving things, what you're doing in psychological terms is something that we call shifting from an internal to an external locus of control. If your locus of control is on the outside, if what determines your state of mind, your well-being is something outside of you, you also take the power outside of yourself and you give it away to other people. Because I guarantee you, we're not going to get rid of all of the offensive people. We're not going to get rid of all of the offensive things. You're never going to stop being offended by something, and you're going to be constantly a victim if you do that. And it's your choice if you want to do that. But I personally would rather not be a victim. Okay, I would like to bring my locus of control on the inside. Now, paradoxically, there's an interesting corollary to this, and that's this notion of that Stephen Covey talked about. He called the circle of influence. If you imagine two concentric spheres, and this is everything in the world, and then there's a smaller sphere on the inside. And these are the things that you can actually have any impact on. Well, when we put our energies on stuff outside of that circle, this circle gets smaller, right? But when we put our energy into the circle itself, the things that we can change, the circle of what we can change gets bigger. It expands. It's a pretty profound thing. right? So having an internal locus of control is ultimately, paradoxically, going to give you more control over the outside world as well. It's going to allow you to have more impact on the world. Now let's look at this from another lens. When we try to restrict speech, we create some really serious problems in society. We will not be able to face problems directly. If we're so concerned about offending people that we make it illegal for people, for example, to say certain things, which is one of the things that was happening in Canada, which is why Jordan Peterson shot to stardom, because he was fighting, I think it was Bill C-16, where they made it a law that if you used the wrong pronoun for someone, that would be a punishable offense. So, they're trying to make it illegal to say certain things and compel you to say certain things as well. And if you control someone's speech, you control their actions, or you control their thoughts. And if you control their thoughts, you control their actions. I was speaking about this the other day, my little rant about free speech. Okay, so another lens that we can look through this with is this. If you, in your efforts to be sensitive about different cultures, geld yourself such that you are unable to make observations about cultural differences, you are gelding yourself. You are neutering yourself. You are taking away your own power. Cultures do have differences, and it does not make you a racist to make those observations. What would be racist about it is if you said, well, all people from this country are this, right? That, in my estimation, is what racism is. Okay, if you are, on the other hand, are making an observation that, hey, people from certain cultures have certain tendencies. That doesn't mean that individual A from culture B is always going to be like that. No, every individual is different, right? So when we apply the generalization to everyone, and then we start to bring hate upon those people as a result of that, or worse, violence, that to me is what racism is about. It doesn't make you a racist to say, well, in India, people, for example, revere the cow, right? And that reverence of the cow is going to tend to manifest in different behaviors. I would imagine that on a statistical level, you're going to find fewer beef eaters amongst Native Indians than you will of other cultures. This is I would imagine, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm guessing that this is probably a relevant statistical observation. Now, does making that observation mean that I dislike Indian people? No, not at all. I love Indian people. I love people from basically every culture. I have friends across the entire globe. I have friends across every culture. I have friends who hate each other because they have different political views or different views of the world, and they cannot resolve those things. Somehow I'm able to navigate those relationships with them. But part of how I'm able to do that is me also, recognizing the differences in them and respecting it. Because if you don't recognize those things as a business person, for example, you're going to make some big catastrophic blunders. And I'm going to make a rather controversial statement here. Okay. So I was in a podcast this morning and we were talking about hiring people from different cultures. And I was talking about how it's important to notice how there are tendencies in certain cultures. I'll talk about the Philippines for a second. So half of my staff is in the Philippines. I've spent quite a bit of time there. I love the people there. I adore the people there. There are things in Filipino culture that you have to be aware of if you're going to hire there. So for example, in the Philippines, it is quite common when you hire someone for them to want to bring in a family member, right? And then often, you can end up hiring people across an entire family. Now, anybody who's been in business for a long period of time knows that that is a precarious situation often in business, because if you have family ties that are mixed in with business ties, it can create enormous complications. Okay, now does me making that observation, is this a horrible, terrible thing? Does it make me a racist person? Does it mean I dislike Filipinos? No, of course not, right? There are observations I can make about American culture. We have certain tendencies in America, some of which are good and some of which are bad. There are wonderful things about the Filipino culture and not so wonderful things about the Filipino culture. And when we geld ourselves in this way and we make it unable for ourselves to make these types of observations, it's a real serious problem because it does two things. Okay, one is it makes us unable to improve ourselves. First off, if we're so sensitive about somebody making an observation about our culture that we blind ourselves to the problems in our own culture, and believe me, in the United States, we have some serious problems as a culture that we need to correct. And if we can't make those observations, we won't be able to correct them. Well, and two, we can't make observations about other cultures for the better or for the worse. It means that we can't take from the Filipino culture what is good and take from the Filipino culture which we think is not so good and say, well, let's make sure we don't do that, right? And that means that Filipinos wouldn't be able to take from American culture and take what's good and look at what is bad in American culture. For example, in the Philippines, they have a much stronger emphasis on the family unit right now than we do in the United States. That family emphasis gives them a certain amount of strength that we don't have. The de-emphasis of the family unit in the United States, I would say, is a problem. We have statistical observations that show that, for example, single motherhood correlates very highly with drug use and criminality. It's a very important observation to make. Perhaps, if we want to improve ourselves as a society, we need to look at, what's happening in the Philippines and see how the strength of their family unit is something that we can draw from and take into our culture and improve. Say, aha, there's something we can learn from. Let's take it, into our society and let's build upon that. Now that, by the way, was one of the notions upon which the United States was founded. So in the United States, this idea of having, a loose confederation of individual sovereign states that were bound together by a relatively weak federal force, which, by the way, over time has become more and more powerful, which is a whole other conversation, which has gone, a little bit contra to the original intentions, as I understand them, of the founding fathers. But the idea was, hey, let every state run themselves as they choose to. And then what we have is 50 test beds, 50 experiments going on in tandem. If you think socialized medicine is a good idea, see if you can actuate that in your state, and then let's find out, can it scale? It's a whole other conversation, by the way. I've seen socialized medicine work extremely well in New Zealand, but some people argue that maybe you can't scale it, right? So maybe socialized medicine would work, if it's managed on a state-by-state level or a city-by-city level. Who knows? But if we don't allow ourselves to have tests in the different states, one state can't learn from the next. So I think we should celebrate our differences and be, open about it, right? If you talk about it from a lens of like, well, I hate those people because they're X, Y, Z, well, that's a problem, right? But if you openly discuss, hey, in your culture, does this tend to be this way? I love having those conversations. I endeavor to have those conversations as much as I can. When I get into taxis, for example, often the people driving taxis are immigrants from other countries, and I will ask them about their culture, ask them about their country. Rarely are they offended, right? From time to time, you might find someone who is, and if they are, you got to navigate that. But for me, it's like, I would rather risk the offense and have the conversation with you and be able to have the opportunity to bond with you on a deeper way and learn something useful from you, be it for the good or for the bad, than to prevent myself from being able to have that conversation at all because I'm so concerned about offending you, right? Guys, we're all different. We're all different as people. We have so much that's in common, but so much that's different. And that's not a bad thing. Let's celebrate it. Let's face it. Let's share amongst each other what's good, observe what's bad, and maybe help each other improve along the way. And I think that's a wise thing. All right, guys, that's it for today. You have a beautiful day. I know I will have an absolutely fantastic day because I'm going to make it a fantastic today by the way I am thinking, acting, feeling, and talking. If you saw my talk yesterday, you can take a look at that. I'm talking about one of the notions inside Simpleology that we have called the TAFT loop. It allows you to interrupt a process that has a lot of us going off in the wrong direction. If you interrupt the TAFT loop such that you are changing your thoughts and changing your actions and changing your feelings, changing the way you talk to be more in alignment with who you want to become, you have way, way more control over your destiny and over your mood and over your entire life in general than most people do. All right, guys, you have a beautiful day. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow.